You just download this, and then you can pull models and just run them with GPU support, so they're fast on your Mac or Linux machine. It's incredibly easy, and it's a great way to tinker and sort of like see what's at the cutting edge of open source. And I think it really changed my view on like what was possible with.
Welcome to AI Product Engineer, where today we have the privilege of speaking with Jacob Lee. As a founding software engineer at Langchain, Jacob is at the forefront of developing a groundbreaking framework that empowers developers to build sophisticated applications powered by language models. With Langchain, Jacob and his team are paving the way for the next generation of AI-driven applications, ranging from ChatGPT-style interactions over custom datasets to automated reasoning and complex question-answering systems. In this episode, we'll explore Jacob's insights into how frameworks like Langchain are revolutionizing the way developers build AI applications. So, let's dive in and learn from one of the brilliant minds shaping the future of AI and language technology. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you, Rod. It's really great to be here.
Well, Jacob, before we got into all this topic of building AI apps on the browser with JavaScript, can you please tell us a little bit more on how you got where you are now? What has been your journey?
Absolutely. So my background is actually mostly in developer tools and frameworks, and not so much in AI. So previous to joining Langchain, I was a founder of a company called Autocode that did similar to Replit, where you had a lot of new developers and folks getting started with coding. In web dev, we had an online editor and software platform for deploying and writing code in the browser and then deploying it serverlessly. So we took care of scaling and kind of a lot of the difficulties around getting your code into production. So for me, very deep web dev background, very deep framework background, pretty shallow LLM AI background. After Autocode, I left in January, ended up doing some contracting and sort of like, figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I realized that, wow, LLMs are pretty amazing. Did feel a little bit left behind by a lot of the sort of amazing things folks were seeing in Python, but then I stumbled on what was then the original version and iteration of Langchain.js. And so I was actually a contributor and user before joining and maintaining the product full time. So for me, yeah, it was sort of a, an arc that I like to see that, I certainly enjoyed, and I've been really enjoying working with and using this new and foundational way of writing software in JavaScript. And it's an arc that I'd like to sort of feel passionately about bringing more folks through, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that is amazing. And then, so you were saying now before you were doing a bit of consulting, also you have more of this web dev background, so not exactly machine learning. So what have been like things that have been new to you that you needed to maybe like learn or understand again that were different compared to what you were doing, working on web applications, backend, and so on?
Absolutely. I think one of the most amazing things about this latest revolution in AI kicked off kind of by ChatGPT and OpenAI, but now followed on by all these open source models and companies like Anthropic and Google picking up a lot of steam, is the fact that you don't actually need to have a super deep knowledge of how the LLM works, or like you don't need to have a super deep knowledge of a lot of the theory behind transformers, for example. It can help, and I think it can help help developers write better prompts and sort of understand when and where to use LLMs. But the fact that it's a simple API call away is just so powerful. So for me, I've had to pick up a lot of some of those foundational pieces are, as someone who's maintaining the project in the LLM space, a bit more important to sort of like be able to place in my head and frameworketize and kind of place and categorize in my head. But as an application engineer, you just need to know sort of like where and when to get a sense of where and when to use this sort of amazing new technology. And the fact that it's over and available via an API call or frameworks like Langchain is really powerful.
Now you're mentioning Langchain. For those who do not know Langchain, how will you describe Langchain?
Sure. Excuse me. We're a framework for building powerful apps with reasoning capabilities and with LLMs. So we're like the plumbing you would use to build with technology like ChatGPT or like OpenAI's, with GPT-4, GPT 3.5, et cetera, and all these other models.
Langchain is very popular in the Python ecosystem, and then you're maintaining the JavaScript, TypeScript version. Um, what will you say to someone who is starting in the JavaScript world, building AI applications? How can Langchain help them in their journey?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the nicest value adds, I think, for new developers is the fact that we help you swap in and out different models, and different other pieces like vector stores and embeddings really quickly. So you can experiment with, for example, OpenAI's models in one moment, or Anthropic's models in another moment, or Google's in a third moment. So that kind of swappability and that ease of being able to try all this new technology very seamlessly is one big piece. And then also sort of like having this conceptual and modular framework for working with these apps too. So, there's a fire hose of information out there, and one thing Langchain helps with is sort of putting rails on it and like sort of guiding you towards good use cases and good things that you can put in production.
Mhm, mhm. Eh, Recently, a JavaScript developer was telling me so that the person is a bit afraid that JavaScript might die long term. That might be a little bit of a dead end for any developer because so many things are happening in Python regarding to AI, but there is not much happening in JavaScript. So, what would you tell to those who are seeing in the JavaScript world this massive wave of AI innovation that's happening in Python and a bit less so in JavaScript? Should these people start learning Python, or can they stay in JavaScript for the foreseeable future?
So I think there's a really great saying I've heard many times now, and I think it's always in my career something I've seen true. And that is that if it can be written in JavaScript, it will be. And I think that's partially due to the power and sort of ubiquity of the browser, one of the most foundational pieces of technology out there, especially to the end user and the general population. So if you want to reach this wide swath of audience, you're going to have to use JavaScript at some point, or at least you're going to have to build something in JavaScript to serve those people. Just given the power of like that kind of ecosystem, and it's now spread towards building desktop apps in Electron, or even mobile with React Native and other technology like that. Kind of momentum and ecosystem is so powerful that I think you're going to see a lot of this tooling and things you can work with be available in JavaScript and Node and Deno, excuse me, and all these the web generally. And yeah, frankly, I think with tools like Langchain.js, it's now possible to build pretty sophisticated apps in a short amount of time and get bootstrapped up really quickly in JavaScript as well.
So if I am a JavaScript developer who so far has only done mostly web apps, maybe even only like front end, then how do I get started? What would you advise me to do as a first step?
Yeah, at the risk of being a little bit self-serving, we have great tooling and great courses from particular friends at Scrimba, scrimba.com, I believe, or scrimba.io. Let me double check that quick. Yeah, scrimba.com. I've done this really awesome interactive guide and tutorial on getting started with building with LLMs via Langchain.js. And they walk you through kind of the basic concepts of here's a prompt. This is what a prompt does. It formats input to the LLM with some parameters and then passes it to the model in the right way. And this is how you basically combine these pieces together to build a kind of starter project, which for Langchain has been one of the most popular, a way to conversationally chat with your documents or PDFs or some other sort of data source, and sort of take this large amount of unstructured data and be able to ask meaningful questions about it. So I would say they're a great place to start, and that's one that I've really enjoyed working on. And kind of they also let you sort of edit the code. You can think of them as like interactive screencasts where there's code on the screen, and then you can edit it in combination with the instructor and run it yourself as well. So you can get this really deep kind of understanding and sense of what the code you're writing is doing, rather than just watching it statically on a screen.
Mhm. Um, this example that you bring with the chat with your data seems to have become a little bit like the hello world of LLM applications. And so, if a developer wants to exactly do that, they want to have a small application to chat with their PDF and so on, then which modules or components does this person need to use in order to start doing this? And how does LangChain help them in this?
Absolutely. There's a few pieces, rather. Of course, there's the LLM, which is kind of the brain and the central locus of asking questions and being able to for the software to understand information that a human would provide in natural language. But then you have also pieces like embeddings, which are a different type of model that they're embeddings which let you take this unstructured text and represent it in a format that a computer or you know uh, another piece called a vector store can search. There's the
Vector database?
vector database that basically lets you search through different natural language chunks, which you'll create as part of the app. and sort of find the ones that are most relevant, because you can't pass the LLM too much data, it'll get distracted. And if you can limit it to the most relevant pieces, that really improves performance significantly. And to search through these vector databases, and you also want to, they also store your input data as well. But to search through these vector databases, we use what's called an embeddings model, which is another type of machine learning model that basically takes input text and puts it in a format where a program could search through it, or an app could search through and find the most similar or related chunk. So it encapsulates various pieces about the input text, such as obviously the words themselves, but then also like sort of more abstract meaning behind those words, and also captures some pieces of how they fit together. Yeah, so I think those are probably the three most major pieces, and then we'll get into a bit around, or the course rather, gets into pieces around loading the documents and retrieving them and splitting them as well. So those are some of the pieces that Langchain really helps with.
If I look at all the integration that Langchain has, it's a bit overwhelming, where alone for vector databases, there is likely some more than 20 that are there. And for anyone starting, this is a bit overwhelming, where, of course, all seem to be really good. All these vendors claim to do everything. So what do you advise on how to choose which database, which component? Maybe there is already some blueprint of what makes sense in the beginning.
Totally. So I think a lot of these tutorials will pick one. I think the Scrimba course uses Supabase, which is also a SQL database as well, like sort of they're the open source Firebase alternative. So they have a lot of nice features that maybe another database might not have around. If you're already familiar with SQL, or if you're already familiar with technology, it's great that they have a vector offering as well, because you can use what you're familiar with and use a lot of those nice dashboard and sort of administration tools that you already have worked with before, or things like Mongo. A lot of people are already familiar with and love Mongo. So why not just use Mongo Atlas? Or some have like Weaviate has GraphQL, and is like a very deep GraphQL integration. So if you like GraphQL, maybe that's a good choice. And Pinecone has been like around for the longest time and has like sort of the most market share, and maybe has some more advanced features that they are working on there. So yeah, I think there are like sort of unique flavors to each one and sort of unique offerings. And generally I would say start simple and start with if you're already familiar with something. Other projects, or like other web dev projects, that could be a good reason to pick one over the other.
Original Langchain started as a Python library, and then the JavaScript version came a bit later. And as a result, how close do you try to be from the Python API? How Pythonic, so to say, is the JavaScript version, and how JavaScript native are you trying to do it? Is it becoming really something that is fully targeted for the JavaScript developer, or are you trying to have some sort of cross-compatibility? How are you trying to develop this?
Absolutely. So we recently actually did a big refactor where we split out a lot of the really just core components and sort of interfaces that make up Langchain. So base classes and sort of really things that we want to keep similar between Python and JavaScript in the long term. And we're going to aim for one-to-one parity there. I think as you go up the sort of stack, like integrations are never going to be completely cross-compatible. It just wouldn't make sense in a lot of cases, right? Because certain things only run in the browser, for example, or certain things rely on very deep Python libraries like Pandas, or things that just don't have a JavaScript analog yet. Nor can we rely on one necessarily, nor do we have the power to rely on one or expect one anytime soon. So yeah, I think anything in kind of our core library and piece, you can expect really good analogs and sort of equivalents there. And then we've also been pretty hard on our work on serialization, and that's like something we take pretty seriously. If you're familiar with the Langchain ecosystem, you might have seen Langsmith, our observability and tracing platform, for building with and debugging these LLMs. And serialization is a big piece of that. So you can send runs to it in Python. It'll actually deserialize into JavaScript in the playground if you wanted to rerun something or debug a specific call. So we definitely take care of and maintain that piece for ourselves, and therefore want to make it reliable for other folks as well. So important integrations and like popular ones, you'll be able to sort of deserialize and serialize between languages as well.
And of course, in JavaScript, there are a few ones. So there's Danfo and a couple others, but they are much smaller, and they do not have the same level of complexity and feature richness compared to, for example, Pandas. And here, what I'm wondering is, based on what you have been seeing on the ecosystem, If you were to encourage someone to start an open source project in JavaScript to enrich this landscape of LLMs, AI applications, and so on, what would you suggest them to start doing that you feel that at the moment is missing in JavaScript?
I think that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of the really sort of low level tools that help with fine tuning, maybe, um, are a bit more specific, and you only really need to run once, and wouldn't really necessarily need to use in a web dev environment. So I think if you're really into the specific tech like that, it's maybe okay, and like people are capable of using it in Python. I think the more interesting pieces are like pandas that sort of let you build more powerful applications and things that run faster. I think that's like focusing more on the application layer essentially. As like that's where I think web devs and sort of application builders and sort of shippers tend to use things more. So focusing more on the high level application pieces and things that people find useful versus maybe the lower level, more niche stuff that already exists in Python, and I think caters towards a more like specific and technical crowd that don't mind the language difference.
Mm. And you are very close to the community through this development of Langchain for JavaScript. What has the community been asking for? Are there things that surprise you that you felt maybe that are not necessary and people wanted, or the other way around, things that you thought, hey, this is really necessary, and turns out that there was not that much interest?
I think one thing that surprised me was kind of coming into this. I really, and this is going to sound a little bit maybe a little bit behind the times for me, but I'd really only worked with sort of like the browser, and then built my backends in Node, and like sort of that was my life. I had been a little bit behind the whole Vercel, Cloudflare web technology, edge function sort of ecosystem that's going on now. So I think one thing that surprised me was sort of like how much enthusiasm and how much sort of like desire there was to be able to build all these, build with this amazing technology and build with Langchain JS in the web and in these edge environments. I think so. We've tried to make like edge support and edge function support and this portability aspect that I think JavaScript brings really top priority, and make sure that everything we build, um, as much or at least as much as we can, works in both edge environments and Node and Dino, et cetera. So I think the portability aspect was one thing that really surprised me. And then one thing that maybe surprised that folks didn't care as much about.
Well, you were saying about these applications at the edge, and something that is also happening is that we're having soon in JavaScript and in general in the browser the whole topic of web GPUs, and also from the academic side there is also this idea of web LLMs that are trained models that are downloaded into the browser and then are running using the GPU of a machine from the browser without needing to install anything. Is this something that you have looked around, that you have any thoughts about it? And if yes, how do you think this will impact the JavaScript developer?
Yeah, totally. So I did try it out a fair bit for when I was building the sort of initial version of my local LLM app, like sort of LLM based RAG app in the browser. I think my hope was that I'd be able to build something compelling with just technologies that entirely ran in the browser. So basically, yeah, as you said, web LLM and using web GPU, et cetera. But I think what I found was the experience was a little bit rough at the moment. I actually ran into like a pretty gnarly caching failure where like basically it kept every time I refreshed the page, it would re-download this entire 2 gigabyte or 3 gigabyte Llama 2 model, and eventually that obviously filled up my computer's RAM and bricked it. So I had to restart and sort of go from there. Um, and I think one thing with it is that, and one reason why I went with something like Olama, which basically lets you run these download these models in advance and sort of run them.
So you mentioned the topic of running applications at the edge, and in the JavaScript world, it's happening that soon we're having web GPU support. Also, on the academic side, we have web LLMs. The idea is that I just download directly a pre-trained LLM into my browser. I don't need to install anything locally. And in theory, everything runs from the browser without any type of installation and so on. Have you already been exposed to this? And if yes, what are your thoughts? Do you think that JavaScript developers will be working with this in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one I did try it out, and I think part of my goal with building my locally running RAG app in the browser was to have everything run entirely in the browser using technology like WebLLM and WebGPU. So I did check it out and tried it. I think I quickly ran into an issue where it was a little rougher and had a few more rough edges at the moment. I think one was that the caching didn't seem to work properly, where it kept every time I refreshed the page in development, it would re-download this multi-gigabyte Llama 2 model and eventually filled up my browser's cache and crashed my computer. In fact, and sort of encountering that was I feel symptomatic of maybe a more broad problem where if you're going to a web page, you don't necessarily want to be downloading this multi-gigabyte file just to, for example, run like a simple some kind of inference. So for me, I think I gravitated more towards Llama, where you have the users and have their responsibility to download these models once in advance and sort of share it across multiple different websites potentially, with native GPU support. But having said that, I think if the caching situation does get figured out and maybe it's built at a more deep level into the browser versus allowing web apps to just spark these downloads themselves, it could be more compelling. You could have like patches in your browser where it's like download the latest Mistral LLM that runs in the browser, and then web apps could have like a list or something presented to them where they could pick like the best of a certain or one of a certain set they support, and then sort of match it against like a browser's internal list. But at the moment, yeah, I think the caching story would need to get a lot better and sort of would need to be something that you perform in advance rather than when you go to a website. I think anyone who's worked with edge functions and Vercel knows that they're obsessed with getting every single percentage point of performance improvement that they can. And you can imagine that adding a 5 GB download at page load would impact your lighthouse scores pretty substantially. So yes, I investigated a bit, but yeah, I think opted for the local model approach because it's closer to what I believe like the web experience should be in the future.
Yes, I have also worked with web LLMs and play with web GPU. I find it super exciting, but I also faced similar situations as what you described, where downloading these huge files into the browser and then also refreshing, also so it felt a bit laggy and so on. So it still felt very rough, but I do think that this is a very interesting way of how things could develop further. And one of the things that made me think about this is the nature of JavaScript. Where in JavaScript, of course, everything can run really on the browser directly. We can have also Node and run certain things on the server. We can have this hybrid of browser, server, and so on. So thinking about that and thinking about developing AI applications, what do you feel should be so done exclusively so for the browser? Let's say like a front-end level running natively in the browser, and which things should be done on a Node or Deno level and somehow here so sent to the browser?
I had a pretty good experience working with a lot of the client-side technologies, like embeddings. There tend to be smaller models and things that may be more feasible to download on runtime. And I know some of TensorFlow.js's success stories have been in things like image processing. I think Adobe built their latest web Photoshop version using TensorFlow.js, running mostly in the browser, or at least having some of these machine learning models running in the browser. So I think the split for me seems to be smaller models, things that would take you'd expect a fair bit of startup for anyway, such as like a photo editing app or things where the user has the expectation that it's loading some heavyweight or powerful code, and I'm going to have this great experience because of that. That's where it makes sense to me to run things locally. I think a lot of the more heavyweight inference, where especially to get, I was trying to download small models that were still effective and they were still gigabytes, and to get really high quality open source inference, a lot of these models tend to be even larger. I saw one that actually required or claimed to require 190 gigabytes of RAM to run locally, which is far beyond what most of us have. So text-based and sort of LLM-based inference seems to be a bit more of the domain of APIs, calls, and servers than client-side, at least for the moment. And offloading smaller tasks like embeddings or some of that to the client side could help improve like performance and sort of load on your server that way.
Mhm. Yes, indeed. And another question or comment I hear often, it is on people say, yes, with JavaScript and doing AI applications, one is pretty much limited to doing, let's say, like API calls, like what one would call it, like these thin GPT wrappers that one so sometimes mentions. But at the same time, so there is this rise of local models. So you mentioned now Llama. So what have been your experience working with so these local models? Do you think that the JavaScript developer can just go and then grab them and start working with them, or at the moment it's pretty much that one should just remain in the realm of a cloud model such as GPT?
No, I would 100% suggest to anyone listening right now, just go on and download a Llama. It's a desktop app. built by some folks who used to work at Docker Desktop. You just download this, and then you can pull models and just run them with GPU support, so they're fast on your Mac or Linux machine. It's incredibly easy, and it's a great way to tinker and sort of like see what's at the cutting edge of open source. And I think it really changed my view on like what was possible with and like what I believe is possible in the future for open source models. Just being able to viscerally and sort of personally play with them and sort of see what they can do was really would be an experience I recommend to anyone with, of course, the required hardware. You do need a newer-ish MacBook or a more powerful Linux machine. Yeah, no, I think a lot of I've been really impressed by some of the work Mistral's been doing as well with their new line of models, and now they have a Mixtral model, which is a bit more powerful than the baseline, but is already showing some really impressive results. And then you're seeing more folks fine tune on top of that for different chat use cases or coding use cases. And we're at a point now where with a somewhat powerful MacBook, like not I can't run it on mine personally. I only have 16 gigs of RAM, but if you had like the latest one with maybe 32 gigs of RAM, you could run basically a GPT 3.5 model, quality model, just on local hardware, which is incredible, like absolutely insane. If you're a JavaScript developer and you're listening, definitely go try it, see what the future is going to hold. I think while some of these bigger companies and frontier models might hold an edge for possibly forever, or there's always the joke of like, oh, what did Ilya see? Like, is AGI coming? And Q star, like, that's one. They'll probably always have some kind of research edge, I would think, but longer term, you're going to be able to do a lot of what you can do was previously the realm of GPT-4 and sort of maybe a year behind, but probably runnable on like local hardware. The best minds are not always going to be in one place or one company, no matter how big and how powerful. So very excited for the future of that, and would recommend to all JavaScript developers check it out, try it out, and see how you can work it into your experiences and apps.
Talking about Langchain for JavaScript, when would you suggest for a JavaScript developer to start with Langchain? Is there, let's say, a sweet spot when it makes sense to use it, or when maybe like already too complicated or too simple for the use case? Are there any pointers for anyone who has never used Langchain before?
I'd recommend it no matter how simple the use case. I think even just the swappability component and the fact that you can try different models and swap in something that you're running locally via Ollama for OpenAI, if you want to try that out, that's a pretty compelling case for beginners and people getting started on its own. We've done a lot of work to keep the bundle size small as well. I believe gzipped with the right sort of bundler like you'd find in XJS, we're under like 50 kilobytes of size. So it's definitely something you could work in. It's lightweight despite the kind of reputation it has. Yeah, I think the ability to try out all these different pieces is a really compelling piece on its own, and something that I think is great for new developers and people getting into the space.
I have used Langchain pretty much since the early days, and one memory that I have was the first time I tried installing it was I really struggled. I could not install on XJS. I even opened a ticket, and then we had to do quite some hacks to get it up and running. What was surprising was how even within a few days, there was a new release that fixed this and made this everything very smooth. So I could see that the pace of development that you have is very, very high. All new things are coming all the time and so on. So if someone is aware of Langchain but has not checked in a while, somehow lost track and so on, are there any highlights of recent developments or anything that you find interesting to share with the community?
Yeah, so as far as the Next.js piece and sort of compatibility and portability, we see Vercel Edge functions and Cloud for Workers as sort of first-class targets. We love using them ourselves, and we want to make sure that Langchain works really well in those places and that you can use them and feel comfortable deploying it there. And, built out, I think, some interesting pieces where, for example, Google didn't support Vertex models in web environments, but we figured out a way to make it work. So we, really see them as equal footing with Node and sort of traditional apps built there. And then, as far as I think we've done a lot with our core refactor to keep our bundle size small and sort of eventually we want to allow people and support really lightweight bundles where you basically just use Langchain core along with maybe one package or two packages. So you can sort of one-stop shopping, or not one-stop shopping, but as if you were at a shopping cart, picking out these different integrations one by one. If you really wanted to just make sure that your dependencies are small and that you're pulling in the least amount of code that you can be. So you'd be able to, for example, just install at Langchain Mistral and use like Mistral's built-in inference with sort of the core Langchain primitives that you're familiar with. And we've been working a lot to promote good interoperability there to build more of like an ecosystem rather than just like a monolithic Langchain package. So that's been a lot of the focus lately, and it also helps us version things better and define like what is production ready and what's a bit more experimental and a little bit more maybe research papery. That's been pretty exciting, and I think it's something that'll the community will enjoy.
And different to how traditionally machine learning is developed in Python, where Python offers all this flexibility. And I wonder if there have been any learnings or any challenges that you have had in building a fully compatible TypeScript implementation, so for Langchain.
Oh, you say that, Rod, but I think some of the, and this is all rumor, but the way OpenAI supposedly implemented function calling was actually using TypeScript definitions. Not you pass in JSON schema, but they will translate it and feed it to the LLM as a TypeScript definition because LLMs are very good at parsing that. A little bit of hearsay, but I think some of the things that Microsoft has released with TypeChat, or I believe it's called TypeChat, sort of seem to back that up. And yeah, as far as like kind of day-to-day compatibility, I think that we found a lot of the pieces with TypeScript versus sort of more modern Python development have actually been pretty analogous. Like we found, TypeScript is statically typed. I believe that's a term where you basically compile things ahead of time, and then, you write your code and then it checks it like as you're writing it, and then compiles it down to JavaScript at the end of the day. But while Python is more, I think, runtime compiled, so there's slight differences there, but on the whole, it's been pretty smooth. And we found sort of things like Zod that match up nicely with Pydantic schemas and things that have a similar sort of ease of use and feel, if that makes sense.
So you were talking to, let's say, like a junior JavaScript developer who is a recent graduate, and the person is looking for working with AI, maybe like understanding where to spend the next 5 years in their career. Which advice we will give to this person in terms of what to learn, what to study, what to get exposed to?
I think there's a big fear when you saw ChatGPT, right? It's like everyone's jobs are going to be irrelevant. Like it's going to change like the entire world in a snap of the fingers, right? And I think while that was definitely overblown, at least for now, we'll see. We'll see how the next few years go. It is like a really foundational shift in a new way of writing software that I think wasn't there before. Like, it turns these like really hard problems like fuzziness and like sort of undefined, like less defined steps into now somehow and like natural language parsing into like very trivial problems. While also funnily enough, making some trivial problems a lot more difficult, like unit testing. Like how do you unit test an LLM call when it's around an API and you can't really mock it locally as effectively. So yeah, getting familiar with like the sort of traditional ways of writing software where you have like very structured and defined inputs and outputs, sort of getting used to this new like fuzzier, more less deterministic but somehow more powerful way of writing software, I think is always going to be a good investment for any new developer. And then also, just staying flexible and sort of trying to stay on top of things as best you can. There's a lot out there and a lot of new things happening every day, but just trying your best to stay ahead of the tide and like sort of see where and how you can apply these new trends to like your applications, I think will always serve you well.
Are there any resources that you consult frequently that help you stay up to date?
To be honest, it's really my Twitter account. I think I've curated a good couple list of folks, X, formerly Twitter, excuse me. But I've curated a good list of folks that kind of tweet high quality information and sort of good papers and good high signal content, and that's honestly been my biggest source of like new news and new developments. But I think there's some good blogs, and our blog is great. Would recommend that, and great podcasts like this one, and I think getting a good mix of content like that is great. But for me, it's been mostly Twitter.
Another comment that I hear from web developers, especially in the JavaScript world, is that tell me, I'm interested in AI, However, it will take me years, maybe in decades, to get to the point where I can do things because I can need to learn all this math, all this linear algebra. Then I need to like understand all these models and so on. So it will be a very long road. And on top, I have my day job. So this will be a very, very long journey until I am a proficient in this topic. What can you say to these people? So is it really so that it will take them a decade to start doing things, or are there shortcuts?
Well, yeah, absolutely not. I think that's the sort of beauty of what's been going on lately with all these new APIs and all these new models that you can, download an app and run locally in 10 minutes, is that you do get to skip out a lot and take advantage of a lot of the hard work and effort done by these amazing scientists and like people who train these models. And um, it's easier than ever to get started and integrate them into whatever you're working on. And again, like I think it can be a great gateway into learning more about the fundamentals and foundations of these models as you go. But you do get that, you can now get that immediate feedback and sort of like do something useful with it right out of the box without needing to know a whole lot about the finer points. So those people, I'd say, yeah, just you can go a long way with a lot less knowledge now.
And you have a pulse into what's happening in the JavaScript world. Um, is there anything that you see happening in the next year, in the next 2 years, in this intersection of JavaScript with AI? Where do you think we're headed?
Yeah, I think JavaScript has the most developers and it's the most popular programming language in the world. So I would expect to see a lot more just web apps being created. There already are. I think by our metrics, we're seeing a lot of popularity in the JavaScript ecosystem and interest in Langchain. So yeah, I'm very optimistic there. I think there's a lot of really cool things to be done with things like code generation. So Vercel is, I'm sure many of you have heard of V0 and sort of generating really beautiful UIs with sort of fine-tuned models. I expect to see a lot more like really cool use cases there as like fine-tuning flows get more refined and sort of we get a better sense of how to evaluate these LLM outputs and good frameworks and processes for doing that. And hopefully, yeah, open source models I think are going to eat the world eventually. Like at least to a point where they can handle a lot of great and sort of popular use cases themselves. I saw a really cool PR the other day from the team at Hugging Face adding a integration with one of their new inference platforms, and they were actually able to run our agent loop. Agents, for those who aren't familiar, are sort of we think in Langchain of different levels of autonomy, basically for your apps. At level 0 is writing just step-by-step code, traditional what you're probably all familiar with. And then at the top end we have like these autonomous agents that you just give it a high level task and it figures out the set of steps that it wants to take. So we had this really kind of one thing that made Langchain sort of become popular in the beginning was we had this really great framework for working with and constructing these more like experimental Skynet-y applications where you just let the LLM pick whatever you want it to do and it goes and does find some steps to do it. So someone, at the time it relied on sort of OpenAI's top of the line model, which at that time was GPT-3, but then is now GPT 3.5 and 4. But someone is able to actually run that demo using a 7 billion parameter model, which is very, very small. It's something that you could run locally as well. And that's in, just over a year's time, someone was able to take our sort of the most advanced thing that anyone was doing with an LLM, or like one of the more advanced things anyway, and run it on basically a laptop. So, the kind of pace there, even if it's a year behind, I think that'll really be something that more and more people should get familiar with.
If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, is there any advice or any direction you will give and say, hey, focus on this, or maybe don't focus on that, or keep an open mind, or what will you tell to your younger self?
Yeah, I think personally for a long time I was sort of I was very focused on building autocode and like what I was working on there. And I think to that detriment, like we at the time built on, we started in 2016 and built on what at the time was sort of top of the line tech with AWS Lambda. And, not saying it's not useful anymore, but that was like the serverless revolution and a lot of the easy scalable compute was sort of the word of the day or like zeitgeist. And I think, we really focused hard onto that, but then sort of, like I said, missed out a lot of the new things like edge functions and these web environments that can spin up so quickly and provide a lot of the same experience. And then, also GPT-3 came out in, I think, 2021. So it's been out for almost 3 years now. So I do think like getting too laser focused into what I was looking at and sort of keeping my head too far down and missing out on some of the new amazing things that were happening was to my detriment ultimately. So I would tell someone, in my shoes maybe 5 years ago, just keep your head up and keep that intellectual curiosity about the field you're in, and sort of figure out how to at least categorize a lot of the new developments that are happening, even if you're not directly working with them every day in your day job.
Jacob, is there any last thing that you would like to share to our audience? And also, where can they find you?
Absolutely. I think best place to find me, my Twitter account at Hakubu, Hacubu. I made it when I was 12, so excuse the somewhat goofy name. I post a lot about what's the newest with Langchain and sort of what web devs are working on in the LLM space, so cool projects and things like that. And I try to retweet some of the cool things I see from high signal people that I see as well. And yeah, as far as last thing to say, I would say just I think the most important thing now is to keep building and be supportive of what other folks are working on, and try to build in the open. And it's very early for all this tech, so building in the open and being supportive and signal boosting other people is really important. And I think it'll take kind of everyone to sort of get the best use cases and figure out best practices here, just because the potential scope is so large. So yeah, just keep experimenting, keep building, and stay curious.
I fully agree with you, Jacob. So definitely, so given that we're a much smaller community in the JavaScript world compared to Python, it's important to highlight who is building it, and so on, and then supporting each other. And with that said, thank you so much for being here today, Jacob. So for everyone, please check Langchain, use it. Also, go and check Jacob's account, and get in touch if you are curious on how to get started working with JavaScript, building AI apps using Langchain. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you very much, Rod. Take care.